everybody, how's it going? Well, we just finished the Overlanding the Northwest video series where I took my 1996 Jeep Cherokee on a week-long expedition trip going from Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. And in this video, I would like to talk to you guys about that vehicle, how it performed, what I did to get it ready for the trip, what things that happened to the Jeep as we were traveling, and finally, what happened to it, because it's no longer on the channel. So, sit back, come join me, and let's talk about the 1996 Jeep Cherokee. So let's just talk about the Jeep Cherokee itself. The Jeep was a 1996 Cherokee XJ, and it had the 4.0 inline 6 high output with an automatic transmission. It was the part-time four-wheel drive. It had the Dana 30 front axle with the Chrysler 8.25 in the rear. The Jeep had a set of custom bumpers front and rear with a set of rock sliders, and the Jeep was also equipped with a rough country 3.5 inch lift kit with all new springs front and rear and front control arms. And then to finish it off, it was running a set of 31 by 10.5 by 15 Falcon MT tires. Now, as an Overlander, I actually felt like this entire combination was actually really nice. It still had good road manner. It had good flex when off-road. The tire size was fairly decent. Yeah, I know 31s are quite small, but it actually worked relatively well with the Jeep. So what preparations did I have to make to the Jeep Cherokee to go on a week-long adventure? Now, when I bought the Jeep, there was actually quite a bit of things that were wore out on the Jeep that I had to replace just to get the Jeep to be reliable again. Now, those things included, I needed a whole bunch of front end suspension joints that were wore out. The Jeep needed all new shocks all the way around. It also needed new U-joints in the rear driveline. And then the Jeep did have a slip yoke eliminator kit, but the previous person drove the Jeep for so long on a bad U-joint that it actually started breaking the flange that the U-joint slips into and gets bolted, into location. So I ended up replacing that entire transfer case with just a stock transfer case. The exhaust system, the muffler was going out, so I had to put a new muffler on it. And I gave the transmission a new filter and fluids. The engine, I gave it a complete baseline of fluids. I gave it new engine oil. I changed the oil filter. I did, a complete electrical tune-up of plugs, cap, rotor, wires, and gave it a new air filter. Also, the radiator, I was having issues with the Jeep wanting to stay cool at a lower speed, so I ended up putting a 4-core aluminum radiator in it. I made sure that the radiator had all of its plastic shrouding to help maximize the pull of the air. I put a new water pump on it. I put a new clutch fan on it, new thermostat, And then I also mounted up a manual override for the secondary fan. So then that way I didn't have to rely on the temperatures getting up to a certain point, before that fan actually kicks on. I can just get out on the trail, turn that override switch on, the fans would start coming on, and it'd keep the system nice and cold. So those are the real major things that I had to do to the Jeep just to get it reliable again. As far as preparations for the actual trip, the only real major thing that I did was I fabricated a new tire carrier for the rear bumper. I wanted to utilize that a whole lot more, of having a mount for my axe and my high lift jack and shovel. Also, I made a drop down table to be able to work off of, which came in super handy. And got a CB radio system installed. And I did trim the fender flares and opened up the, I removed the fender flares and opened up the wheel wells just a tiny bit to give the 31-inch tires a little bit more room, just to reassure that they won't rub on anything. So let's talk about how the vehicle was set up for camping, for overlanding. And actually the Jeep was quite basic. So I mounted a rooftop tent to the factory load bars, but I modified the factory rack a little bit to handle a little bit more weight. And that worked out really, really well. I did the modifications to the rear bumper of building a tire swing out because the one that was there was complete garbage. So I made a much better tire swing out that it could hold 2 jerry cans. I had a 5-gallon jerry can of gas, and then I had a 5-gallon jerry of water. So that was our water supply was on the tire swing out. It had the drop down table for cooking and also for doing simple just work on the computer. And then for the cargo area in the Jeep, it was very basic. I had one tote that was just all of my kitchen stuff, and then I had another tote that was all of like the vehicle maintenance stuff, my tools, oils, spare parts, even some like camping equipment. The smaller items went into that tote. And then I had a cooler, not a fridge, for that trip. And then we just had our bags of clothes. Now on the way to Idaho, I had my boys with me, and they were going to stay at Grandma and Grandpa's house in North Idaho. So on the way over there, I had actually, the only space available was the back of the Jeep with the rear seat up. Everything had to fit in that small area, and that was it. So it actually worked out really, really well. We were our system was very basic, our setup was very basic, but it actually worked quite well. was there any problems that occurred to the Jeep while going on this adventure? And the answer is yes. Yes, there was a few issues that occurred while we were traveling. One of them was, and this one kind of stumped me for a little while. One of them was the Jeep started developing a knocking noise, and it was relevant to the engine. And at first I thought, well, maybe the Jeep is slowly starting to lose a rod bearing, or maybe it was valve train. And I thought, well, you know what, we'll just go as long as we can, and if the engine lets go, the engine lets go. I'll reach out to some friends, grab my trailer, they can come rescue the Jeep and tow it back on a trailer. But it never happened. No issues with the engine, but we still had that knocking noise.
The knocking noise was very distinct when a large load was applied to the engine when trying to climb over stuff. If you listen carefully here, you can hear the knocking as I try to accelerate up this section. And that is the result of loose torque converter bolts.
Once I got back from the trip, I pulled it into the garage and I started investigating of what was causing that sound. Well, it was not until, I want to say, when we started doing Pine Point Trail that we heard this knocking starting to get more prominent. And what it ended up being was the bolts on the torque converter loosened up a little bit, and so the torque converter was sitting there moving around on the flex plate of the back of the engine, and that's what was causing that knocking sound to happen. And thank goodness it didn't get worse. The bolts didn't get worse. Now, shame on me, I should have heard that sound and I should have been at camp and pulled out the tools and starting giving the Jeep a once over, and I should have, removed the inspection plate and take a look in there, but thankfully no other damage did really happen. I just tightened up the bolts when I got home, and it's been perfect ever since. Now, another thing that was starting to become an issue was the exhaust. So where the exhaust manifold gathers from two pipes into one pipe, the collector, it is very known for those to crack. Well, mine was cracking quite a bit. It was getting louder and louder and louder, and there was nothing I could do because I didn't have an onboard welder. I did have some welding rod to where I can weld DC off of the batteries, but it was too big of a rod to be able to weld that size of pipe, and for that type of job it would have been like pretty much a half a day designated into removing the exhaust, pulling it down, and fixing it accordingly. And I ended up having to cut a section out when I got back home to fix it. I had to actually cut the pipe a little bit farther down from the collector to be able to remove it, weld it up correctly, and then reinstall it and weld the pipe back in. So that was actually quite a task to repair, but honestly it just made the vehicle louder, so it really wasn't hurting anything. And then another thing that the Jeep was starting to have issues with was the front axle shafts. I had on the driver's side a U-joint that was starting to dry up, and it was squeaking quite well as we were going down the trail. And I noticed it more when I was turning left to right in four-wheel drive, and that's really when I started hearing the noise. So those are the things that did occur to the Jeep while we were on this overlanding journey. So, what do I think about overlanding in a XJ Jeep Cherokee? My opinions. Honestly, I think this Jeep, I think those Cherokees are a fantastic platform. The engine has plenty of torque and power for, especially when you start putting a lot of kit on your vehicle. And the NPGs were not bad at all. That really surprised me. Having the back of the Jeep set up for overlanding or camping, there's a lot of space and there's a lot to work from. Honestly, I think the Jeep Cherokee would be a better platform if you turn it into a 2-person adventure vehicle instead of a 4-person, because in that way you could remove that whole back seat section out, and then you've got this wonderful area to set up for either sleeping in the back of the Jeep or just simply to hold all of your equipment and your gear. Would it make a good family adventure vehicle? If you've got 1 or 2 kids, I don't think it would be that bad at all. You would be limited in cargo space, but honestly, I don't think it'd be all that bad. I think actually, if I did the math, if I remember correctly, the Jeep Cherokee had more cargo room than a 2nd-gen Toyota 4Runner does. So that's pretty impressive, right? And honestly, I was impressed by the Jeep. It performed amazingly, took us into some really, really good sections of trails, and it performed wonderful. I mean, the thing was loaded down and I was rock crawling with it, and there's one part where going up this rocky section and I go to avoid going around another rock, and the front end just climbs up and flexes out over this like rock or stump sticking out, and the Jeep didn't even flinch by it. It just went right over it. So that was that was quite impressive to see that in the videos later on, because when I was driving it felt actually really stable. I was quite impressed, and I didn't realize what I just drove over. So that was really, really cool. Would I be up for adventuring or building out another Jeep Cherokee? I think I would one day. I think I'd like to go 100% on fully outfitting one and using one for a while. Just to, you have that experience of, well, what could we go, above and beyond with on a Jeep Cherokee? And so what happened to it? Why do I not have that Jeep Cherokee anymore? Well, basically it came down to my family. So my 3 boys, they did not fit in the back seat of the Cherokee. So on those, in the back seat, the wheel wells actually come in quite a bit into the seat, and it takes up, I think I measured it, it takes up like 6 inches of seat space that, from door to door, you just lost 6 inches. I think it was like 6 inches on each side that the seat tucks in. And at the time, I had 1 kid in a booster, and then I had 1 kid still in a car seat, almost a booster. And so the 2 kids that were in the boosters, they were fine. They had their own little comfy spot. It was my oldest son, Kobe, that was suffering the most, because he was left with very, very little space in that back seat. So I sold the Jeep Cherokee and that is what introduced the Tacoma. So that is no longer why I have the Jeep Cherokee, was simply because I wanted to make overlanding a lot more comfortable for all 5 of us. Sure, me and Mom had the best seats, but I wanted my kids to really be comfortable and enjoying the trip, because when you're out adventuring and if your kids are not enjoying themselves, they're going to quickly make it to where you're not enjoying yourself. So keep that in mind if you've got some kids or you want to get your kids out and start getting them involved in overlanding travel. So thanks guys for tuning in on this video, and I'm glad to give you guys the insight of how the Jeep Cherokee did for me and why I no longer have it. So until next time guys, we'll see you out on the trail.
Watch me sway, darkness falls and we all pray.